Welcome to The Angle. News breaking on multiple fronts. You will not want to miss a single minute of this show tonight. Al Franken's career on the ropes as a tsunami of Democratic senators are now demanding that he step down. And a bold and historic move by the president, moving the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem, recognizing it as the capital of the Jewish state, sparking vows of violent protest across the Muslim world. We're going to talk about it in a rare interview with former Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld. Don't miss this. And you want to stay to the end of the show tonight, where I'll deliver a special message on Time Magazine's farcical Person of the Year choice. But first, the desperate political warfare of the left. That's the focus of tonight's Angle. I'm going to explain to you what's really behind all these calls on Capitol Hill suddenly for Al Franken to resign from the Senate. At last count, 34 Democratic senators, look at them all there, are demanding that Franken step down in the wake of a string of harassment allegations that we've been hearing about now for days. Now, before you join the march up the castle, to the Castle Frankenstein to capture the monster, I have a word of caution. They've come down with a sudden case of feverish morality, but what it really is nothing more than a political calculation by the Dems. Look, they have two paths to destroy the president. The first is the Mueller investigation. We've been talking about how that's corrupt to the core. Last night with Jeannie Rhee, yet another prosecutor who shouldn't be on this case, we broke that story exclusively last night on the show. The second way they're going to try to destroy the Trump presidency is the war on women. Yeah, that old saw. They have now determined that it's worth sacrificing Franken, just like they did John Conyers, throw him overboard to save the political Titanic that is their party. Now, what does this do? It sets the precedent for the Democrats to try to drive Roy Moore from office should he win the Alabama Senate race. And two, this is the next step in the quest to impeach President Trump. Now, the left is brilliant. They're really, really smart at using the media to create a narrative and pound it all day long that quickly becomes a political bludgeon. The drumbeat of accusations and the calls for scalps advance the false premise that the left are all about protecting women. In fact, both Hollywood and the Democrats, think about this. They've objectified and pornified and abused women for decades. And the abusers, let's not forget, have been celebrated. Ted Kennedy, Bill Clinton, Matt Lauer, Kevin Spacey, Franken, Conyers, Weinstein, the list goes on and on. So I'll tell you this tonight. Be wary of the lynch mob that you joined today, because tomorrow it could be coming for your husband, your brother, your son, and yes, even your president. And that's The Angle. Now, someone who knows Democrats and the games they play like this better than anyone, former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich. Mr. Speaker, it's good to see you. Welcome back from Rome. Let's talk about the games that are being played up there on Capitol Hill. There's all this newfound moral outrage about Al Franken and all these Democrats and John Conyers. What's really going on here, fast-forwarding to 2018?
First of all, I'm going to be very politically incorrect. Let's go back to who Al Franken was a month ago. He had the #1 best-selling book. He was a very funny guy. Democrats loved him. He was doing fine. And then things began to fall apart. Now, all of these nice people, none of whom have given back the money that they raised from Harvey Wiseman, none of whom Weinstein, none of whom have repudiated Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton, none of whom seemed offended in the past, suddenly in a paroxysm of moral outrage, create a lynch mob. And what you saw today was a lynch mob. Let's not have due process. Let's not ask anybody any questions. Let's not have any chance to have a hearing. Let's just lynch him. Because when we get done lynching him, we'll be so pure. We'll feel so good. This is a party which is losing its mind. I think, I'm being very politically incorrect, but let me just be clear. I think that the Gillibrands and others are literally losing their minds. I think that Elizabeth Warren is losing her mind. I think they're in this moment of existential enthusiasm, which in the middle of the Middle Ages we call flagellante. People would walk around, they'd beat themselves. They would beat themselves. They'd say, "Oh, I feel so much better now. I'm beating myself. Look how bad I am." These are people who grew up in a party which used to preach free love, which used to think that all of the hippiedom was wonderful, who used to think they somehow represent the future, and now they've suddenly curdled into this weird Puritanism, which feels a compulsion to go out and lynch people without a trial.
I just want everyone watching to understand that Newt Gingrich is here tonight, and he's standing up for Al Franken, okay? And I've got to tell you, I said last week that I didn't think he should resign because until, I think the voters have to have a say on this. The pushing people out of office.
Okay. No, I've not read all the detailed various allegations.
It gets too lurid.
To the best of my knowledge, even the one which broke today, which was the horrifying last straw, which led Schumer to decide, as a great New York Paul, that he had to suddenly stand on the side of Puritanism, which is actually by itself pretty bizarre. As I understand it, that occurred 2 years earlier when he was a comedian. So let me say again, politically incorrect. Al Franken was a comedian. Comedians often do weird things. He was in the entertainment business. He was doing the kind of things people in the entertainment business do. Now, I have not, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't see anything that they've said he's done since he was a senator. I don't think they've said...
I've tried to lose track. I think there are a couple allegations of inappropriate conduct, but I think it's minor stuff.
But the point is, we're in one of those weird American moments when running around lynching people feels so good.
Yeah, it feels good to them.
I mean, if you go back and you go back and watch the YouTube of Clarence Thomas.
I was just going to say my old boss. Yeah, you know how he felt.
Who, by the way, was wonderful and swore in Callista.
Oh, great!
A great moment, and fellow Georgia and everything. But you go back and you look at what he said about an electronic lynching. And then you look at what we're saying. I mean, again, Conyers had a lot of good reasons to retire, but on the other hand, no hearings. No witness.
No, there's no due process. If you're accused and you're a man, you're accused, you're done.
This is Venezuela, Cuba. This is every third world banana republic.
But they're doing it because they want their power back. They have no substance. They have no issues. It's the war on women redux for turning out the vote in 2018 and 2020.
I'm not even sure they're doing it for that reason.
Really? Oh, I do. I think it's get out the vote.
No,
I think that's all it's about.
They're doing it because they get together at a cocktail party, look at each other, and they go, "Oh my God, can you imagine?"
I know, because they want to hit Roy Moore, Newt, and they can't hit Roy Moore as long as Al Franken's sitting in the Senate. They can't go, "Oh, Donald Trump, you campaigned or you supported Roy Moore."
Let me ask an inappropriate question. What do we know about Doug Jones?
He's pro-abortion. That's what I know.
Yeah, he's pro-abortion. He's pro-gun control. He's left. But what if it turns out next Tuesday that Doug Jones actually had an inappropriate date when he was 11 years old, and it was really inappropriate, and he shouldn't even be on the ballot? Are the Democrats now going to jump up and go, vote for Roy Moore? I mean, we're in a cycle which, by any reasonable, this is cultural anthropology time. This is watch the natives go nuts.
Speaking of nuts, let's go right to the Mueller investigation.
Okay.
So they got all these prosecutors who I believe are politically compromised. One worked for the Clinton Foundation, Jeannie Reese. She represented Ben Rhodes, who was the Deputy National Security Advisor. We broke that last night. And then she is now working for Mueller, Andrew Weissman. He got the Peter Strzok, who was struck from the team. But what about this investigation? And is this now not all tainted because Mueller did not remove these people or assembled a team with a political, seemingly, at least on the surface, a political axe to grind against his president?
When they first appointed Mueller, I tweeted that I thought he was a very responsible person. And then I watched who he began to hire. And then I looked at his own law firm, which, by the way, gave...
Wilmer Hale.
Which I believe gave 99.18% of its money to Hillary.
That little? Mm.
Yeah, only 0.82 to Trump. And I began to look at all this stuff, and then I began to think about how they're doing this. Hillary's top aides clearly lied. Not a single indictment, not a single conviction.
Immunity, it looks like, for Cheryl Mills. So.
Hillary is never put under oath, because you can't get them for perjury if they never swore. Okay? Now you get to, it's time to go after the Republicans. And I would say that, and I say this in all seriousness, I mean, I'm making fun about the Franken situation. If Hillary had not lost, we would be mired in the deepest level of corruption in American history. Mueller is corrupt. The senior FBI is corrupt. The system is corrupt. And until you get back up and say and realize how really, truly corrupt this is, I mean, there's a sickness here. My granddaughter Maggie got me to read a fascinating book about murder in Osage County in the 1920s. And everybody in the county law enforcement was corrupt. And the people who came in, ironically, were the FBI, who were the honest outsiders. What you now have is the Osage County corruption at the level of Comey and Mueller and that entire system. And I mean, I think it is frightening. If you believe in the rule of law and you believe in America, what we are learning is genuinely frightening.
Finally, Jerusalem, moving the embassy to Jerusalem. There's all the elites in Europe are up in arms. Theresa May, Merkel, they're all going.
It's so lovely to know that anti-Semitism is alive and well in Europe. The fact is, the only country in the world which is not allowed to name its own capital is Israel. I think what Trump did today was courageous. I can also tell you, having talked with the vice president this afternoon, this was systematic, it was thoughtful, it was strategic, and they believe it strengthens their hand in the end at getting to a peace agreement.
Newt Gingrich, it is always great to see you, and give my best to the ambassador. You're an ambassador's husband now, and you got double duty.
The State Department calls a trailing spouse.
Oh, a trailing, never trailing in our show. Great to see you, Newt. And next, two top Trump insiders, Corey Lewandowski and Dave Bossie, join me with insights you're going to hear nowhere else. And Time Magazine's Person of the Year is just another excuse to bash the president. Come on. I'll explain in a continuing angle. Stay there. Steve Bannon makes no bones about it. He wants Mitch McConnell to go. And I asked Mitch McConnell about that last week, and he had some choice words, as you'll recall, and a lot of other establishment Republicans as well. Now, Bannon sees them as the biggest obstacle to passing the Trump agenda. So he's lining up anti-establishment Senate candidates like the embattled Roy Moore in Alabama. Now McConnell is fighting back. He's calling Bannon's preferred candidates a bunch of losers.
We're not going to lose any nominations to the kind of candidates that guy you were talking about endorsed. What he's a specialist in is nominating people who lose. This is the same element in the party that cost us a bunch of seats in 2010 and 2012. We changed our business model.
Well, to sort this all out, I'm joined now by the authors of a soon-to-be huge bestseller, I'm so excited, just published, insider account of The Campaign. I'm just going to call it The Campaign. The book is Let Trump Be Trump, the inside story of his rise to the presidency. We welcome former Trump presidential campaign manager Corey Lewandowski and deputy campaign manager Dave Bossie. Dave and Corey, congrats on the book. Love the blurbs on the back, by the way. They're awesome.
They
Love
are
them.
tremendous.
I'm just glad. I'm gonna rub this in Hannity's face that my blurb is before Hannity's. I love it. That's like little victories for me. I want to get into the book because it's fascinating. You get into the Trump personality, his management style or lack thereof. But on the way to that, I want to talk about this brewing fight between the establishment now and Bannon and the populists. Like, I'm a populist. You guys are pretty populist conservatives. This dovetails into so much of what you wrote about in your book. Who survives this fight? Is it the Bannon or the McConnell, or will it be a draw?
You know, I think it's going to be very interesting. I think they're going to coalesce around some of the same exact candidates. It's going to be very funny that Steve Bannon's going to be saying these are the conservative populists, and they are. And Mitch McConnell's going to be trying to take them for his own as establishment candidates. And we're going to see, we have a tremendous crop of candidates out there, whether it's Josh Mandel in Ohio, Josh Hawley in Missouri, all across the country. There's tremendous conservatives running for office. We're going to pick up seats in November, and it's going to be because of this Trump agenda that we're so successful.
But Corey, isn't McConnell moving a little bit to Trump now? You heard him on chain migration. I interviewed him last week. I'd never heard him so conservative. He's like pushing chain migration for the RAISE Act. I mean, this is good. This is Trump.
The president is a force, and this is why he is always so successful. He brings people kicking and screaming to his side because he knows.
He brought you guys to your side.
He knows it's the right thing to do. And what Mitch McConnell knows is that the American people said, we're bringing Donald Trump to Washington for change. And the people that are going to run the 18th cycle, the Josh Mandel's of the world, and I've been out campaigning for Josh in full disclosure, he's going to come here to change the way Washington works.
The status quo doesn't want to change. They don't want it changed.
You can be left behind.
And well, that's one of the reasons why this president has been frustrated over this last 10 or 11 months.
He gets a little impatient, don't you think, sometimes?
Because he's used to getting things done. He's a New York entrepreneur who says, if you don't get things done, you die, you go away, you fail. Well, guess what? He came to Washington, he wanted to kick in a couple of doors and knock over a couple of desks because Washington is broken. And we, in our campaign and in the book, we detail his passion and what he did to the American people. You were there last year when we were at the rallies at late at night, at midnight, every night, night after night.
I want to talk about the moment that you learned you were not going to be working on the campaign anymore, Corey, because I've been there when I've been fired, and it's not fun. You poured your heart and soul into that campaign. I remember being with you. I think it was in February of 2016. Trump was just, people were hammering him day in and day out. It was at Mar-a-Lago. I think I was there for Palm Beach Republican Club. And the campaign was you and Hope Hicks. That's why I kept saying, where's the campaign? I was like, they said, well, the campaign's up on the second floor somewhere. I'm thinking there's going to be a big war room. I open all these doors. Then I see this tiny office. There's two people working away at the computers. I'm like, who are you? Oh, Corey, where's the campaign? And that was it. So you were putting your heart and soul into this. And then Manafort comes in and it's like,
but look, even at that time, the campaign, if it was 3 people, Donald Trump, Corey Lewandowski, and Hope Hicks, it was 2 people too many. This whole campaign was Donald Trump. 99.99%. And look, the rest of us had a very small role. This was him, his gut, his instinct, his tenacity, his dedication. He outworked every opponent in the primary, every person in that general election. He just outworked in the staff. And so, look, did I have a little bit of a role? I had a front row seat of history. But it could have been me or somebody else. You let Trump be Trump, and he's going to be successful.
I think they're trying to get you for pushing that gal, Michelle.
Laura, they all want.
Everybody was a target. Everyone was a target, but it was kind of fun, wasn't it? I mean, honestly.
The media hated Trump, so that was the narrative they wanted.
The night of the election. Let's go back to the night of the election because, the night before, when we were in Virginia, he actually said we're going to win it. To me, he said we're going to win it. But that night of the election,
it didn't look so good.
He was like, it was fun. You write in your book, well, this was kind of fun, guys. We had fun doing this, didn't we? And then the numbers started coming in. That is so cool.
The early exit polls that we saw at 5 o'clock were just abysmal.
The left was exuberant.
They were, and Hillary's, they're popping champagne corks. We had to suffer through the entire night. It's all in the book, Let Trump Be Trump. The behind the scenes of election night, of the debate prep, it's phenomenal.
Now, when you first met Donald Trump, very quickly,
I met Donald Trump in 2010. Steve Wynn, my friend, was helping me raise money for Children's Hospital here in Washington, D.C., for my son's heart surgeries and brain surgeries. And it was a tremendous outpouring by Donald Trump to me as just no fanfare, no press. He just is a kind, gentle guy.
And we don't see enough of that.
That's why we wrote about it in the book. We wanted people to understand the softer side of Donald Trump.
When he wasn't throwing stuff, and I'm not just
no.
And I've known him for a while.
But I introduced him to Corey.
So gracious, so magnanimous, and look, I spent so much time with him away from my family. He always was concerned about them and made sure that they were taken care of, and that's not what most people do.
They're going to impeach him? They're going to try to impeach him, get him out of office? Successful not?
It is a joke, and we're going to win. We're going to win in November, and we're going to have a great year legislatively, and that'll help us in November.
Now, Corey and Dave, I want you to stand by because former Defense Secretary Don Rumsfeld, who is a fan of this president, is about to come on. Join me exclusively. We're going to talk about Bush's criticism of him and the president's moves today in the Middle East. Thank you both for joining. We love the book. Fantastic. Congrats.
Thank you so much.
Stay right there.
I have determined that it is time to officially recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. While previous presidents have made this a major campaign promise, they failed to deliver. Today, I am delivering.
Clinton promised to do it. Bush promised to do it. Obama promised to do it. Trump actually did it. And it took a lot of guts to make this move. Much of the Islamic world is warning of severe unrest, and some are even calling for bloodshed in retaliation for that move, just as the administration tries to revive the Mideast peace process. Who better to tell us what this all means than former Secretary of Defense Don Rumsfeld? He's the author of a new memoir of his time in the Ford administration called When the Center Held, Gerald Ford and the Rescue of the American Presidency. Mr. Secretary, it's great to see you. I haven't seen you in a while. Thanks for stopping by tonight. I want to start with the big news of the day, the president's decision to move the capital of Israel to Jerusalem. Why is everybody so upset about the timing, given the fact that this has basically been on the books since 1995 with a huge bipartisan support? Most presidents, all the presidents I can think of, said that they were going to do it, and they didn't.
Well, I guess the reason it's an issue is because there are countries around the world that would prefer that it had not been done. It's a no-brainer. It's the right thing to do. President Trump made the right decision. He stepped up and did it. It's inevitable that there'll be some criticism about it, but I just can't imagine any country in the world that doesn't believe that they have the right to have their capital where they want it.
Here's some of the criticism that you mentioned. Put up the full screen. Egypt says it would complicate Middle East matters. Jordan says potentially dangerous repercussions. Palestinians say dangerous consequences. Saudi Arabia, our ally in the region, detrimental to the peace process. Turkey says it threatens to sever its ties with Israel. So the pressure being ramped up both in the Middle East and in elite circles here in Washington.
And in Europe.
And in Europe. Merkel says it's bad. Theresa May says it's bad. The Pope weighed in saying we should keep the status quo. Is President Trump out there the man alone on this?
No, there are a lot of people who recognize that it's a rational thing to do, and it's the right thing to do in my view. And I think most of those countries will get over it. I think they probably have constituencies that feel that they don't want Israel to be a part of that world. And the vast majority of the people in the world feel differently. They do agree that Israel has a right to exist and that it should be a part of that region, and that countries are inevitably going to decide where they want their capital.
Well, the point is they think that Trump is losing the bargaining chip. And to that I said, well, we've been trying that with the bargaining chip, and it hasn't really gone that well.
No, I agree. I think it's not surprising to me that all the countries you mentioned have an understandable need to vent modestly, but it'll go away.
What about if something happens, more terrorism, attacks on embassies? Do you see a blowback on President Trump? Like, you provoked this, you pushed this, you pushed it when you didn't need to, you're a wrecking ball, Mr. Chaos. That's the line from the American media, many in the American media today, that this is just more Trump chaos.
Well, I don't see it that way at all. It seems to me that the president made the right decision. He stepped up and did it. It's inevitable that there'll be people who don't like it and will make noise about it. But the idea that it would lead to a stream of terrorism, I just don't see that at all.
I had Bill Richardson on the show last night, former UN ambassador, and he says he goes all over Europe and he hears very interesting things about the president. Let's watch.
I go overseas all the time. You know what they ask me, Laura? They say, why is President Trump leaving
growing the
Paris
American
Agreement?
economy?
Why is he negative on the Trans-Pacific Partnership?
Because it kills American
jobs. Why does he want to pull out of NATO? Internationally, I travel all the time.
Bill,
we are getting
the European elites
criticized by everybody.
The president's not popular, Mr. Secretary. He's not a popular leader. And Obama was the rock star. Clinton was the rock star. And now we have this guy Trump and Richardson and company, the elites here. It's ruining our image around the world.
Well, that's just not true. The idea that the behavior or the conduct or the decisions or the positions being taken by the President of the United States are ruining our image around the world, I think is a massive overstatement. The reality is that the American people made a conscious decision to put in the presidency of the United States someone who had never served in government, military or civilian. I would have to search through history to see if there's ever been a president who had never served in government. Now, why did they do that? They did that because they wanted someone who'd never served in government. And that's what we've got. He does not behave like an establishment politician. And that is hard for establishment politicians and establishment media to accept, because it's not the normal behavior of a seasoned politician who's the president.
Is part of it that these elites, both in media and in politics, were so taken off guard and so embarrassed by the win of Trump? Because he took them on personally, he took them on substantively, he shattered all the perceptions of how you have to run a campaign. They were all left flat-footed.
Yeah, and no one thought he'd win also. I mean, that's embarrassing. But the American people decided they wanted to roll the dice and put someone in that office who came from a different approach, with a different approach, and they got one. And I was with a very active Democrat today, a wonderful classmate of mine from school, and very much a Democrat. And I said, well, what do you think about all this? He said, well, he hasn't done anything wrong. And he hasn't. He said, what do you think? And I said, well, the most important job of a senior executive is picking good people. And he has picked excellent people. The Supreme Court Justice Gorsuch, the Vice President, Mattis at Defense, his cabinet is as good a cabinet as any one of the 2 or 3 I served in. And it seems to me that he's picking very good people, sensible, sound, thoughtful people.
Parallels between the treatment of Reagan and the treatment of Trump in the media and by the elites, especially the European elites. I was in college. I remember Ronnie Reagan and he's going to blow up the world, the no nukes movement. It was a big push against Reagan. He was going to blow up the world.
Exactly. And he was, the society, the elites in the society were dismissive of Reagan and didn't believe a movie actor and Bedtime with Bonzo could do the job. And he got in there, and that wonderful, warm, sensible approach that he brought to governance won over an awful lot of people in our country, and he did a fine job.
But the elites never accepted him until he was long gone. Now suddenly Reagan's their hero, but they didn't like him much when he was in there. Former President George W. Bush recently said Don Rumsfeld didn't make one blanking decision during his presidency. Stay there for Rumsfeld's reaction. Welcome back to part 2 of our Ingraham Angle exclusive with Donald Rumsfeld. I ask him why the Bushes seem to have such a problem with him and the many foreign policy challenges facing President Trump. I want to move on to North Korea because obviously this continues to be such a difficult problem, seemingly intractable problem for the United States. We seem to be kind of relying a lot on China. And I was going back, and Donald Rumsfeld warning China over military expansion in October of 2005. You were on
That's a vicious thing to quote me.
You were on the China watch in way back, and you were concerned about the buildup of their military. And now China's flying missions right near our joint missions with South Korea this week, coming very close to where we were, kind of sending a message, don't provoke North Korea. What about China? What do we do with China right now in this situation?
Well, it's a new period. China's a major power, and certainly in that part of the world. And it strikes me that President Trump is focusing on the right thing, to be interested in the behavior on the part of the North Koreans. And I don't doubt for a minute but that his effort to engage China on that subject is the right thing to do.
What are our choices?
Exactly. China's a reality. It's very active in the South China Sea. I think the world is
What's a bigger threat to us, I'll say, Russia or China? Who's a bigger threat to the United States, Russia or China?
I suppose I'd answer the question by saying it depends on who's in the saddle in those countries and which one is more likely to make a mistake. Because it's not in either of those countries' interest to engage us militarily. And it would only happen through an error. And my personal view is that the fact that Trump, I don't know President Trump, I've never met him, but that I can recall, but I certainly think that he his demeanor in the presidency is a deterrent for those countries.
Because he seems
well,
like
because
shoot from the hip kind of thing.
Well, he's not tucked in and worried and cautious. He's a bold leader, and he speaks his mind. And it seems to me that people sitting in the Kremlin and in Beijing, seeing that, are probably respectful of the fact that they ought. That it's not in their interest to engage in things that are disadvantageous to the United States.
President Obama was over traveling in India and other countries last week, and he talked about dangerous currents of populism on the left and right. But he said, and like he kind of threw in the left and right, in that we have a leadership vacuum in the United States when it comes to issues like climate change. Do you think it's wise to have a former president of the United States on the global scene? Not so veiled criticism of the current president?
Wise, I don't know that I'd use the word wise or unwise. It's unfortunate. Most people, when they're overseas, tend to be more supportive of our country and more critical of our country when they're here at home. And that's free play and free speech, and one has to respect everyone's right to be critical. But most people do their criticism at home rather than abroad.
The Bushes over the years have taken some swipes at you, HW and W. George H.W. Bush, Bush 41, said that he, at one point or another, said that you and Cheney were basically pushing us into the Iraq War. And W made a comment in a book that was published this month. He said, the fact that there was any doubt in anyone's mind about who the president was blows my mind. Cheney and Rumsfeld didn't make one blanking decision.
Yeah, he's right. I think that his father, who's getting up in years, made some comments about Cheney and Rumsfeld. Fair enough. He's always felt competitive, I think, to both of us. And so it doesn't surprise me. But George W. Bush, who was president, was the decider. He was the president of the United States. Cheney wasn't. I wasn't. And he's exactly correct in his statement. And it was kind of, I think, stiffing arm his father a bit by saying that. And I think it would be wrong to have said anything else. Obviously, he's talking about big decisions, and he was the president, and he made those big decisions. Cheney didn't, and Rumsfeld didn't. And obviously, Cheney gave advice to the president as vice president, and I made an awful lot of decisions relating to the Defense Department, but not presidential level decisions.
Do you keep in touch with George W. Bush?
I've seen him, not a lot, but I've seen him. And
what's the relationship like? It's
good. It's fine. He's a thoughtful person, and I thought he was a good president. I think the country was lucky he was there on 9/11, and he's doing some good things for the military now.
No, he sure is. But so the HW comments from that Meacham biography back in 2015, we said, I don't like what Rumsfeld did, and I think it hurt the president having his iron-ass view of everything. I've never been that close to him anyway. There's a lack of humility, a lack of seeing what the other guy thinks. He's more kick-ass and take names, take numbers. I think he paid a price for that. Rumsfeld was an arrogant fellow and self-assured swagger.
Interesting. Well, he came into the Congress and basically wanted to be president. I was in Congress when he arrived. And he comes in, and he barely was a congressman. He was constantly running for president. And he wanted to be president, and he got it. He made it by becoming Reagan's vice president. And he was very ambitious, and he felt competitive with me during that period. I tried to run for president at one point, and obviously didn't become president, but that doesn't surprise me a bit. I don't get up and say things like that about other people myself. But
were you surprised he didn't vote for Trump, and neither did George W.?
I didn't know that, but I've read, somebody told me they read that. I'm not surprised about Herbert Walker Bush, and nothing surprises me. On did he say he didn't vote for?
He didn't vote for anyone, apparently. None of the above.
He didn't vote for Hillary, I bet.
No.
No. I voted for Trump, and I wouldn't have voted for Hillary. And I get up in the morning and say to myself, I think the country's better off today than if we had Hillary in the presidency.
And Time magazine claims its Person of the Year is about honoring women. I think it's about trashing Trump. And I'm going to explain in an angle you will never want to miss. Welcome back. Time's Person of the Year hits the person of last year. That's tonight's continuing angle. Now, Time magazine has revealed its tiresome Person of the Year honor for 2017. Ooh. It turns out that the person is not a person at all, but a group of so-called, drumroll please, silence breakers, the voices that started a movement, those who turned the Me Too hashtag into a rallying cry. Among the silence breakers are actresses Rose McGowan and Ashley Judd, who together exposed the bathrobed marauder, the pudgy Harvey Weinstein, the founder of the Me Too movement, and a former Fox, now NBC anchor. Here's a bit of Time's Person of the Year, wait for it, video.
I am here to give you permission to be angry. People are afraid, especially women. We're conditioned since birth to be polite.
To be nice, to be kind, to be liked, to not make waves.
Well, there's a lot of BS, which is what she said, and self-aggrandizement out there. And some of it's actually coming from the silence breakers themselves. By the way, how did Megyn Kelly manage to get into this whole deal on the Time magazine? She must have had a better publicist than Gretchen Carlson. Anyway, the Time piece traces the apex of the Me Too movement to the Women's March. Remember that delightful affair? It was a march that excluded conservative, of course, and pro-life women. They don't count. It was almost entirely partisan in nature and an overall disaster. Anyway, a real shocker. It did not even mention the Time magazine Person of the Year issue, Juanita Broderick or Paula Jones by name. Yet, of course, they hit the president and, of course, the Access Hollywood tape, writing that Donald Trump could express himself that way and still be elected president is part of what stoked the rage that fueled the Women's March the day after his inauguration. It's why women seized on that crude word as the emblem of the protest that dwarfed Trump's inauguration crowd size. Now, Time magazine just can't help but politicize pretty much everything. And apparently conservatives, they're not even allowed to oppose harassment or abuse, even though more often than not, the abuse, especially lately, has occurred at the hands of liberals. Of course, in that Time video, actress Ashley Judd didn't dwell on that minor fact. Instead, she pats herself on the back.
I was very proud. I'm very glad now that the story has been heard.
Well, I'm glad that these women have finally told their stories, for sure. They deserve to be heard. But when those stories are enmeshed with an obvious political agenda, it hurts both their cause and their credibility. Now, compare the Judd we just heard, so proud, with the way she and the other women's marchers behaved at that landmark post-inauguration protest. It wasn't exactly the candlelight procession at Lourdes. All I recall is the funny hats and the foul mouths.
I am a nasty woman. I'm not as nasty as a man who looks like he bathes in Cheeto dust. I feel Hitler in these streets. A mustache traded for a toupee.
It is vital that we all make it our mission to get really, really personal.
I have thought an awful lot about blowing up the White House.
I like the Madge who did the Palmolive liquid better. Anyway, does any of that help a woman being abused in the workplace or create a culture of respect? Of course it doesn't. Just you look like a bunch of fools. And like the Person of the Year citation, this cause has been remade into a political weapon with one goal: taking back political power. Trump and populist conservatives took it from them and they want it back. In fact, this same dynamic is at play in many sexual harassment cases. Abusers enjoy wielding power over their victims. That's ironic, isn't it? So let's not pretend for a moment that the Dems are experiencing some moral epiphany here. Are they prepared to posthumously re-examine the life of their liberal lion, Ted Kennedy? Disinvite Bill Clinton and his enabling wife from any future Democrat National Convention? Come on, let's agree once and for all, politics should never define the struggle for basic human decency and respect. All people, regardless of their political persuasion, deserve that. And incidentally, after making him their Person of the Year, last year President Trump was this year's runner-up. So not only did they fail spectacularly in not recognizing him as the single most influential person in this year, they also missed the chance to sell an actual magazine or two.